Hello, my name is Dana Hartline. Earlier this year, my team and I, the Mormon Trauma Mama team, put together a summit called When Church Hurts. We wanted to talk to other people who are also really concerned about what is happening in the church. We wanted to talk about the problems that we are seeing and how to promote awareness, healing, and change. And while we were at the summit, I presented a man who was having a similar dilemma. His name is Ignaz Semmelweis. Perhaps you have heard of him. He is a very fascinating man. Ignaz was a Hungarian doctor, an obstetrician in the mid-1800s. He worked at Vienna's General Hospital, an important research hospital, where he tried to get down to the bottom of the horrendous mortality rate among women in his ward. In the section of the ward where Semmelweis worked, the death rate was 1 in 10. Think of it. 1 in every 10 women died giving birth. Can you imagine? Semmelweis gradually became obsessed with this problem. He dug in to find the reasons. His inquiry gradually led him to a theory. He concluded that particles were being transmitted to healthy patients on the hands of the physicians. So he immediately instituted a policy requiring the physicians to thoroughly wash their hands in chlorine and lime solution before examining any patients. And do you know what happened? The death rate fell to 1 in 100. So he was right. The doctors were the carriers. In fact, Semmelweis once sadly remarked, "Only God knows the number of patients that went prematurely to their grave because of me." Imagine living with that. The doctors were doing the best they knew how, but they were carrying a disease they knew nothing about. It had a multitude of debilitating symptoms, all of which could be prevented once the germ or the virus was identified. As the people in the summit recognized, there is a similar virus that is being spread in the LDS Church. It is destroying the worth, the faith, the trust, the ambition, and so much more of so many of its members. It is destroying members who want or wanted to be a part of the LDS Church, but could not or cannot find solid ground to stand on. I have been looking at this for some time, and I have come up with a picture of what I feel this virus looks like. And I know that it's hard to look and examine this here, but I have done other work on this, and so I will connect a link that explores this in more depth. But this is what I want to talk about. While I was really puzzling over this church trauma dilemma and how to bring it home to members of the LDS Church, my friend Jerry Baird presented to me a blurb that talked about how researchers had worked with domestic violence victims to help them understand their problem. Because most of them had this blindness where they could see that there was possibly a problem, but it was outside of them. And it wasn't something that they themselves could recognize as themselves, within themselves. And so what they did is they created formula stories to make it more recognizable and understandable so that people could say, "Oh, yeah, me too. I too have suffered from that." And it helped bring the people, so to say, down to the roots, even though that wasn't the language that was used. And many received healing through that and help through the creation of formula stories. And I recognized that this is what I see in the Mormon Church. Many people can identify what is in the branches of this tree, but few are willing or able to come down to the roots to see the source of their distress and dysfunction. And so as I was thinking of this really hit home for me because of an experience that I had this summer. This summer, I was invited to do some work with a therapist, and she wanted to do a mental analysis on me. And so while we were going through the process, she said, Dana, there was a disconnect that occurred in your mid-20s. And when she said the word disconnect, my mind immediately went back to my first understood and recognized brush with church trauma. It was an all uppercase trauma that I recognized as so. And because at first I didn't recognize it even then as trauma, I thought it was merely offense because that's all I had been taught. And I was in therapy, and my therapist was getting upset because I would not accept that it was trauma. And so he said, okay, I will show you. And he hooked my brain up to a computer screen, and he said, look at the disconnect. See, you were traumatized by what happened to you. Okay, so going back to this summer, when that word disconnect, I immediately thought of that computer screen. But I refuted this therapist this summer, and immediately, and I said, oh, no. This summer, in my 20s, I was doing so well. I was living my dream. I was doing and fulfilling what I knew God had called me to do as my life mission. I was teaching school, and I was using all of my God-given talents and all of my enthusiasm to the rising generation. I was so happy and fulfilled. And then I stopped suddenly, and I said, oh, wait. And my eyes welled with tears. And I said, that's when I realized that I was pregnant. And what that meant to me as a good Mormon woman was that I was going to have to give up my career, my mission in life to become a full-time stay-at-home mom, because that's what I was taught that women do, and that's what the prophet had been telling us to do. And so for 9 months, I agonized over this. Could I really do it? Could I seriously give up my career to be a full-time stay-at-home mother? 9 months of anguish over this. And I'm not sure men can appreciate this process that many women go through in this experience, or appreciate the surrender of power. And so when I met my beautiful daughter, of course, I loved her in a way I have never loved before. And because she was the most precious and beautiful soul that I have ever met in my life, I said, oh, yes, I will, because the choice was binary. And so I decided that is what I wanted to do. I felt that that's what I had to do because of the love that I felt for her. And so please don't misunderstand me. Don't get me wrong. Much good came from that experience of being a full-time mother in the home. But what that did was that it turned my power, I surrendered my power from God to men who I thought were also equal to God, who could not lead me astray, and that by surrendering my power to them, it was still that same, it was still God. But it explains why I experienced an all uppercase T trauma 4 years later when that soured. When I was serving as the Young Women's President, and a bishop called me into his office and yelled at me for an hour and a half and threw things and told me that I was not living and performing up to his par. Now, please note that I'm leaving out many details that occurred and that occurred after that because it rippled. But recall that I was hooked up to a computer screen, and it was verified that I had indeed endured trauma. So this is, that first one was a lowercase t trauma, a less significant one. No way would I have connected that. But it rang so true to me. And the reason this is so difficult for members of the LDS Church to even want to examine is because this is all that we have often ever been taught. The church is it. And so when something goes wrong, we naturally will turn to ourselves and say, we're the problem, and we hang out in the branches. And it's a system of control that we don't want to see because it's sacred to us and we hold to it. We believe that the prophets can never lead us astray, and that is the way to find true happiness. And I'm not saying that it cannot, but I am saying that perhaps we are not looking at some of the sources of our greatest distress, and that we need to maybe be more willing to examine in an objective light the things that we are taught in our church that we turn our control over and don't really find and experience true healing. I know this can seem harsh and blasphemous to many members of the church. It's hard to examine something that we have always believed and held to and consider to be sacred and unexaminable. We can't really look at it because we feel like we're doing that to God. But I want us to jump back to Ignaz Semmelweis. Ignaz, he felt vindicated. He felt that because he had shown such a significant improvement by people in people's lives, that there were results that showed that he knew what he was talking about. It wasn't enough to change the minds of many of the doctors of his day. And he died very frustrated that he would not be heard and his theory would not be accepted. And this is because change occurs very slowly. People are stubborn, and we don't really want to say that something isn't right, that there are problems with the system that we have adopted and accepted as true. But until we truly are willing as members of the LDS Church, and this is a bold statement, until we are truly willing to look at the causal factors of trauma in the LDS Church, we are never going to truly see more health and well-being among our members. And we're going to continue to struggle and suffer with the influx of the symptoms that we are seeing in the LDS Church. Thank you for your time.